Hey, it's Jason. I've been pretty blunt about my disappointment when the new iPhone 16s were launched. I was really hoping for the much needed change to the design and the form factor, and I felt as though Apple gave us nothing more than a very iterative update, which is the same thing they gave us for the past 5 years. But now that I've had hands-on with all of the iPhones for the past week, surprisingly, the one that has intrigued me the most is the regular iPhone 16. It's really weird to explain, but this particular variant of iPhone has potential to actually be quite an upgrade, but out the box, it's just not. There's a lot that's ultra familiar here and even a lot more left to be desired. But before we jump into it, a real quick plug for the JSL newsletter. I send subscribers a new full-res wallpaper every week, as well as links to really good tech deals and random articles written by yours truly. It's totally free. Link to subscribe will be in the description below. Okay, first, let's talk about design and form factor when talking about the iPhone 16, and there's not that much that's new. The general blueprint Apple introduced many years ago with the glass-on-glass build and the flattened-out frame is still here, and even though I do like this industrial look, it is starting to get a bit boring. Now, Apple, anticipating such angst, dropped some pretty eye-catching colors to keep us all distracted, and I'm totally guilty for falling for it myself. I've particularly fallen head over heels for the new teal. It's a lovely, well-saturated execution, much louder than the colors that came with the iPhone 15s. And I still think that the regular non-Pro iPhone looks the cleanest with its frosted back and matte finish to the frame, and it's even more so this year with the small redesign to the camera housing. Rather than going with the traditional gas burner type camera layout Apple has used for a long time, they decided to shake things up by giving us a cleaner vertical camera array. It kinda looks like the love child of the iPhone 10 and the 10R, and though it is again a very minor change, I do think it looks nice. There's also some functional reasons for this change. The new array allows the iPhone 16 to take spatial photos and videos that could be replayed on the Vision Pro. Will you ever actually use this feature? Even if you have a Vision Pro, probably not. Now, you do get the new action button that was introduced with the iPhone 15 Pros last year, and I actually really love this addition. I drive a Tesla, so I mapped my button to act as essentially a key fob, and I find it to be super useful, and it's low-key a better upgrade than what a lot of people think. And of course, the newest addition to come to all the iPhone 16s is the new camera control button. It's a really covert addition from a design perspective as it's integrated into the bottom of the frame here. It kind of replaces a cutout that was there in previous models, so it's not something people will be able to easily notice, but this is indeed quite a complicated piece of hardware that I gotta say is well done. There's a lot of engineering that went into this seemingly simple button. It can be pressed down all the way to trigger the camera app and the shutter when taking photos, but it can also send subtle force touches that can activate a menu of camera features from which you can then swipe the button using your finger, as it's also touch capacitive. It's a beautiful combination of hardware and software, and even though I do have mixed feelings of its primary purpose, I will give Apple props on the execution here. Now, I'm not one to really linger on aspects of phone that haven't changed, but there is one thing about the non-Pro iPhone that I feel as though warrants at least some discussion, and that's the iPhone 16's display. From a general hardware and resolution standpoint, there's really nothing to complain about. I love the Retina OLED panels from Apple. They're sharp and vibrant, and they make for a great viewing experience. The peak brightness is better, which helps when you're using the phone in direct sunlight, and though it's not as slim as what's on the 16 Pros, the bezel here is pretty well done. But the main beef with the iPhone 16 display is its refresh rate. Much like all the other non-Pro iPhones before it, it still has a 60Hz panel. Now, I want to be clear, I've said this so many times, I personally don't mind the 60Hz refresh rate on the iPhone. I think iOS with Apple's hardware provides an above average smooth experience despite the lower frame rate. And I know there are a lot of arguments that are made that this is not a Pro iPhone and this is how Apple needs to differentiate between its offerings, and I get all that. But here's my take, even if I don't think it matters too much, I also think we're at a place where Apple owes it to the non-Pro iPhone users to make this upgrade. Apple has had its ProMotion technology for years now, and we're at a place where new standards should be set when it comes to the refresh rate because it does make for a better user experience. This reminds me a lot of when Apple was using those sub 1080p LCD screens for the longest time after everyone else switched over to OLED. Again, I didn't care that much from a user experience standpoint, but after a while, it kind of felt like a slap in the face to not give customers readily available technology that isn't anything out of the ordinary. I think if Apple just gave the iPhone 16 a 90Hz refresh rate, which would still differentiate it from the Pros, it would go a long way in making this phone a lot more appealing. And another major contributor to that thought is the fact that from a new feature standpoint, the iPhone 16 doesn't have many. You do get a new A18 processor and 8GB of RAM, a jump up from last year's use of the A16 Bionic, and enough power to theoretically take advantage of all of the power-intensive features associated with Apple Intelligence. At least that's the idea. And I put it that way because this phone shipped with a total of 0 Apple Intelligence features turned on, despite Apple spending most of the keynote for the iPhone 16 harping on these new features. And that's really annoying for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's not wise to buy something as expensive as this based on the promise of features to come because there's still not even clear dates indicating when these AI things will turn on, if at all. Number two, I gotta be honest, AI at the consumer level has been mostly disappointing more than anything else, and even though I'd like to think if anyone has the potential to get it right, it's gonna be Apple, but it's a risky bet in my opinion. Now, I do recognize that the iPhone 16 is the only non-Pro iPhone that will have access to the full Apple Intelligence suite, but I'm of the mindset to recommend waiting and actually seeing what this is going to turn out to be before pulling the trigger. And real quick, if you're finding this video helpful, can you do me a favor and press the like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already? Now, what about the new camera control button? Is that a big enough feature to compel one to upgrade? 1 week later, I'm gonna say, I don't think so. Though it is a well-engineered new piece of hardware, it's not the most intuitive thing to use, as getting that light double tap down takes a lot of practice, especially one-handed, and I feel as though you're more prone to get frustrated by it more than anything else. Plus, I'm not sold that having quick access to these features is that value added. It's not that much faster in day-to-day use, so I have a feeling a lot of people will probably never use this new addition. But let's talk about the camera performance in general. Again, there's not much of an upgrade here, just a slight bump with the ultra-wide camera. Now, Apple tried to make it sound like it got a new camera feature by saying it had the ability to provide users with a 2x fusion zoom that had no quality defects, but they had essentially the same ability on last year's iPhone 15. They called it a lossless 2x zoom back then, and it seems like they just rebranded it, which is nice to have, just odd that they tried to pawn it off as something new. Overall, the still images coming out of the iPhone 16 are great. Apple continues to go the route of providing more natural and accurate looking photos that aren't as stylized. And yes, the new ultra-wide is better, especially in low light, but it's nothing really to write home about. And the same could be said about the video quality. It is better than any non-Pro iPhone by a big lead, but it's disappointing that it doesn't have the new ability to shoot in 4K and 120 frames per second like the Pros. Most non-video people won't care, but it does help you get those cinematic shots at a high resolution. So at the end of the day, when you take away all the promises this phone has yet to deliver on, the iPhone 16 is a very iterative update that I feel as though most could and probably should take a pass on. But then again, who knows? Apple could hit a home run with Apple Intelligence, and with 98% of the older iPhones excluded from that party, the iPhone 16 could be a sleeper hit later down the line. Now that's pretty optimistic thinking, but I do recognize that I've only had this phone for about a week, so things can change over time, but let me know what you guys think about the iPhone 16. Are you as disappointed as I am? Or do you think it's going to have its moment in the near future? Curious to get your thoughts. Let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments down below. And if you're wondering if the iPhone 16 Pro is in the same place, check out the review here. You're going to want to watch it.